Now, in the last lecture, we studied the venous pulse waves, and just a repetition that in this venous pulse waves, A wave is because of the atrial contraction, that is, it corresponds to on the ECG tracing, and this increase in the pressure in the atrium will cause an upward deflection because now the pressure is increasing and that increased pressure is transmitted backward to the major veins. Then the second positive vein is the C wave, and this C wave is because of the tricuspid or atrioventricular elevation into the right atrium just before the contraction of the right ventricle. So then is a downward wave which is called as the X wave, and this is because of two reasons. One is that because of the contraction of the right ventricle, there is a slight downward movement of the A valve, and that will expand the right atrium, so this will decrease the pressure. But the major part is played by the atrial dilatation. That means now the atria is relaxing, so the pressure here is decreasing, and that is transmitted backward into the venous system, and so the pressure in the veins is also decreasing. Now the third positive wave is the V wave, and this V wave is because of the back pressure wave from the blood that is filling the right atrium. That means during this period the blood keeps on pouring into the right atrium from the peripheral veins, and this will keep on increasing the right atrial pressure, and so the venous pressure will also be increasing during this time. Then the second downward wave is the Y wave, and this Y wave is because of the tricuspid valve opening in the earlier part of the ventricular diastole. That means whenever the ventricle diastole will start, that will cause the downward pulling of the tricuspid valve, and that will produce this Y wave. Thus, the physiology of the spleen. Spleen, as you know, is the largest organ of the lymphatic system, and that the primary function of the spleen is to fight against infections. Now its weight is about 100 to 150 grams, and this spleen is located in the left upper quadrant of the abdominal cavity and is protected by the lower portions of the rib cage. Now, grossly speaking, the anatomy of the spleen is that it has got two separate areas. One is the venous sinuses. These are actually the dilated venous ends of the capillaries, and these, as any part of the venous system, they can store the whole blood. Now what happens is that capillaries, splenic capillaries, the blood RBCs and the plasma will ooze out of the capillaries, and that will be stored in this red pulp area, because here RBCs will be remain here, whereas the plasma will be absorbed back into the venous sinuses. So the concentrated RBCs will produce a red appearance, and that is called as the red pulp, and this contains large quantities of the RBCs. The second portion of the pulp is the white pulp, which is a portion in which the lymphoid cells are manufactured, and then they are stored just like in the lymph nodes. Now the functions of the spleen. Now first function of the spleen is that it exchanges lymphocytes with the bloods. That means it not only produces, but it also stores and then adds lymphocytes whenever there is a need of more lymphocytes in the body, and at the same time it also removes lymphocytes from the bloodstream, and then these lymphocytes are stored in this area, and this is the major function of the spleen. The other function is that the resident lymphocytes, they are present in the spleen, that has got two functions. One is that the activated B cells are going to produce the antibodies, whereas the activated T cells are released whenever there is an infection in the body. So activated B cells will produce antibodies and activated T cells are released into the circulation. The third function is the presence of resident macrophages. Now, these macrophages remove microbes and then worn out RBCs from the blood, and these RBCs or worn out RBCs which have completed their lifespan of 4 months, they are trapped while they are passing through the red pulp area, and then they are destroyed by the phagocytes that are present in the reticuloendothelial system. So these macrophages not only remove the microbes, but they also remove the worn out and the damaged RBCs. Then the fourth function is that it can store a small percentage of RBCs. So these RBCs, which we have already discussed, are present in the red pulp. They are added to the bloodstream whenever there is a need of more blood or no more RBCs in the body, and that addition of RBCs into circulation is brought about by the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, and that will cause the contraction of the spleen. So these RBCs will then be added into the bloodstream. So the functions of the spleen are, number one is the immunological functions, that is opsonin production. Now opson in ancient Greek refers to delicious side dish of any meal. So from this opsonin is derived, which is any molecule that enhances phagocytosis by making antigen for an immune response. So we will learn more about this in our blood lectures. Then the second function related to the immune activity is the antibody synthesis, that is, that produce IgM antibodies. Third is that this spleen helps in the protection from infections whenever the blood that is containing the microbes will pass through the sinuses. So these passing will then trap the microbes that are present in the blood, and then they are destroyed by the reticuloendothelial system. Then is the storage function of the spleen. Platelets are also stored in the spleen, and as many as 1/3 of these platelets are stored in the spleen at any given time. So in splenomegaly, that is the enlargement of the spleen, up to 80% of the total platelets present in the body may be stored in the spleen. So that condition may result in what is called as thrombocytopenia. That means there is decreased number of platelets in the blood. Whenever the platelet count decreases below 150,000 per cubic millimeter, that condition is called as the thrombocytopenia. So splenomegaly will produce this thrombocytopenia.